You ever have one of those moments where you just stare at someone and think, asterisk, are you serious right now? Asterisk, that's exactly how I felt when the HOA president marched onto my land, clipboard in hand, and announced that they were putting an ATV trail straight through my backyard. No heads up, no discussion, just full-blown arrogance, like my property was part of his weekend project. I've lived here for over 10 years, worked hard for every inch of this place, and suddenly some guy in a polo shirt thinks he can draw tire tracks across it. At first, I tried to be civil. I explained that my land wasn't up for negotiation, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He claimed it was community development and that I needed to get with the program. That's when I knew I had to get creative, because if he wanted a trail, I'd give him something unforgettable. So I started digging, and let's just say, I turned my problem into a pond, one that now has a few unexpected residents. Now, every time the HOA president peers over the fence, all he sees are ripples, and maybe a pair of eyes watching him back. But here's the twist. This story doesn't end there. Because what happened next? Even I didn't see it coming. Let me back up a bit. This wasn't the first time that HOA had tried something shady. Since the new president, Mark, took over, things have gone downhill fast. He's one of those guys who acts like the neighborhood is his personal kingdom. First, it was mailbox regulations, then mandatory lawn inspections. Most folks just grumbled and gave in, but I've always minded my own business, paid my dues, and stayed out of HOA drama. That is, until Mark decided my land was the perfect shortcut for the new ATV path he'd been planning without telling anyone. I live on the edge of the neighborhood, and my property backs up to a stretch of woods and swampy ground. It's quiet, peaceful, and private. But Mark thought cutting through it would save money and time. He said I wasn't using it for anything anyway. That was his actual excuse. I didn't need to yell or make threats. I just smiled and started working. A few days later, a rented excavator showed up. I told the curious neighbors I was just landscaping. In reality, I was digging out a wide basin, laying down liners, and installing a few pumps. What nobody knew was what I was planning next, and once word got out, well, let's just say the entire neighborhood started paying attention. Within a week, the whole started to look like more than just a backyard project. Mark showed up again, pacing near the edge of my fence like he was inspecting a construction site. He didn't say anything at first, just gave me that smug look like he was trying to figure out what I was up to. I told him, just making my property more enjoyable, and left it at that. He didn't like that one bit. Next thing I knew, the HOA sent me a notice, some nonsense about unauthorized landscaping and disrupting neighborhood aesthetics. It was laughable. They had no jurisdiction over what I did in my backyard, especially on land that wasn't even connected to any of their proposed trails. But here's where things got interesting. Neighbors started stopping by, curious about the pond. Some loved it, others were just confused, but a few, especially the ones who'd had issues with Mark, started asking if they could help. One guy even offered to bring over some koi fish. I smiled and told him I had a different kind of wildlife in mind. Meanwhile, Mark was ramping things up. He called a special HOA meeting, sent out letters warning the neighborhood about unauthorized water features. Rumors started flying. Some people swore they saw something moving in the water late at night. Others thought I was just messing with Mark, but no one really knew what I was planning. Not yet. A few days later, things really started heating up. Mark wasn't just annoyed anymore. He was on a mission. He sent another notice, this time claiming my so-called pond posed a safety risk to the community. Mind you, there were no kids playing back there, no trails even close to my fence line, and absolutely no reason for anyone to step foot on my land. But that didn't stop him from dragging 2 other HOA board members onto my property one morning, completely uninvited, clipboard and all. I caught them poking around near the edge of the pond, trying to take pictures like they were building a case. I calmly reminded them they were trespassing. Mark, of course, tried to act like he had the authority to be there. I asked him if he saw the new signs I posted. Asterisk private property. No trespassing asterisk. He said they didn't apply to the HOA. I told him he might want to rethink that before someone got wet. Or worse. Later that week, something happened that pushed the whole thing to the edge. One of the neighborhood kids dared his friend to sneak over and touch the water. It was just after dark. I was on the porch when I heard the splash and then the scream. The scream cut through the night, sharp and frantic. I dropped what I was doing and rushed out the back door, not really sure what to expect. But as I reached the edge of the pond, I saw Mark, pale, wide-eyed, and stumbling backward, like he'd just seen a ghost. The two kids who dared each other to sneak over were nowhere in sight. I caught a glimpse of something large moving in the water, but it wasn't clear what it was. Mark didn't even wait for an explanation. He was already on the phone with someone, his voice shaking, demanding animal control, or some kind of expert. But all I could think was, this wasn't going to end the way he wanted it to. As he ranted into the phone, I turned back toward my house, casually as if nothing was happening. But in my mind, the pieces were starting to fall into place. The truth was, I hadn't just filled the pond with water and called it a day. No, I'd done a little more research. I carefully stopped it with reptiles, crocodiles, to be specific. Not the giant, terrifying kind that could cause real harm, but enough to get under Mark's skin. Enough to make him second-guess his every step when he came anywhere near my property. The fact that he'd seen something moving, something big, wasn't a coincidence. But it wasn't just Mark's paranoia I was worried about anymore. The HOA was growing more aggressive, and now the whole neighborhood was buzzing. I could feel the tension building, and everyone seemed to be waiting for the inevitable showdown. What would happen next? Well, Mark wasn't going to be the only one in for a surprise. Just when I thought I had the upper hand, something unexpected happened. The following morning, a massive truck pulled up in front of my property. At first, I thought maybe it was just another delivery or construction vehicle, but then I saw the logo on the side, HOA Landscaping Services. My heart sank. Mark had gone all out. He wasn't just complaining anymore. He was taking action. They came armed with chainsaws, bulldozers, and a team of workers who clearly had no idea what they were about to walk into. I watched from my porch as they began clearing the trees near the edge of my property, preparing to survey the land, as Mark put it. The nerve of it. He was trying to bulldoze his way through my property line, even though it was clearly marked with signs and even a fence. I had a feeling he'd escalate things, but this was bold. It was like he thought the HOA owned everything. As they moved closer to the pond, I could feel the tension building. Something in me snapped. This wasn't just about a stupid ATV trail anymore. It was about my right to my own land, and about standing up to someone who thought they could push me around. I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and dialed the one person who could put an end to this, my lawyer. But as I was about to make the call, something unexpected happened. One of the workers shouted. The rest of the crew froze. I turned my head just in time to see what they saw, a large, unmistakable ripple in the water. And then the unmistakable snap of jaws. Something huge was moving just beneath the surface. Panic spread quickly through the workers. They backed up slowly, eyes wide with fear. Mark, still standing in the back of the group, looked like he'd just seen a ghost again. But this time, it wasn't just a trick of the light. I knew it was time to make my move. This wasn't going to be a simple battle of wills anymore. Things were about to get much messier. And Mark? Well, he had no idea what was waiting for him. The workers were on edge, but I wasn't about to let them take another step onto my property. I walked down the porch steps, my heart pounding, and called out to Mark. "You know, it's funny," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I was seething. "You thought you could just march in here and bulldoze your way through, but you didn't even stop to think about what you were up against." Mark turned toward me, looking flustered, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. "This isn't over. You've gone too far this time." His voice trembled. He wasn't the arrogant HOA president anymore. Now, he was just a man who realized he'd bitten off more than he could chew. I didn't say anything. I just nodded toward the pond. The workers had all backed away, looking like they were about to flee. The water was still now, eerily calm, but the tension in the air was thick. Mark followed my gaze and froze. Then it happened. From the murky depths, the unmistakable shape of something large rose slowly, an enormous scaled head breaking the surface of the water. It wasn't the huge, terrifying croc I'd originally hoped for, but it was more than enough to scare the daylights out of anyone who wasn't prepared. The creature let out a low, guttural hiss before disappearing back into the water with a splash. I saw Mark's face go pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The workers took one look at him and then bolted, running in every direction, their panic feeding into the chaos. It was over. The fight had been won. But just as Mark turned to leave, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, I heard a car pull up behind me. I didn't have to look to know who it was. My lawyer, finally arriving, got out of his car with a confident smile. I walked over to him, my heart still racing, but knowing this was the end of it. The HOA couldn't touch me anymore. But as I turned back to look at the pond one last time, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, near the edge, something new was emerging. A second creature, bigger, more menacing, and much closer to the shore. My lawyer noticed it too. Then, without warning, the air was thick with tension again. Mark, still wide-eyed, glanced over his shoulder at the new creature, his fear turning into disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" he whispered. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Well, Mark," I said softly, "I didn't just dig a pond. I dug myself a new problem, and I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about it." As the giant crocodile's head broke the surface once more, I realized this was just the beginning. The HOA president might have lost the battle, but the real fight had only just started, and I was ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, the whole neighborhood buzzed with talk about the crocodile pond. It wasn't just about the wildlife anymore, it was about how far I'd gone to stand my ground against the HOA. Mark didn't show his face for a while after that, though I heard whispers that he was on leave for some personal reasons. I couldn't help but laugh. As for the workers, they didn't return either, and the HOA seemed to back off from their earlier threats. The pond, though, remained. It wasn't the tranquil water feature it once seemed to be. Now, it was a symbol of standing up for what was right, of refusing to let anyone take what was yours. It wasn't just my land I had to protect. It was my peace, my privacy, and my right to make my own decisions. I kept the pond exactly the way it was, and over time, it became something of a local attraction. People from all over came to catch a glimpse of the mysterious pond, and maybe, if they were lucky, the crocodiles. Mark and the HOA. Well, they learned the hard way. Some battles aren't worth fighting. As for me, I was finally left in peace, and that was all I ever really wanted.